Welcome to the Honourable and the Hack.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Honourable and the Hack, your newest podcast here in Newfoundland and Labrador. My name is Andrew Parsons, and I'm here with my co-founder, co-creator, co-host, Mr. Alex Bill.
Hey, Andrew. Hope you had a good holiday. I know I did, including getting a fantastic reception to our first few episodes and hoping that continues. How was your break?
Break was great, and I think one of the highlights, though, was us being able to drop this just prior to New Year's, and same thing, getting a lot of great reception from people out there, comments, messages. I mean, I was in the rink the other day with my daughter, and had a guy come up and mention that before he went to the rink, he spent an hour listening, and I'm like, man, that's awesome. I mean, that's exactly what I guess we were hoping for, but you never know how it's going to go.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of great reception as well and responses, and including some constructive criticism and feedback that I found really valuable. And it's leading us today to talk a little bit, first off, about what we've learned in the kind of slow process of getting this started and putting it out there, and how we hope to get a little better at this as we go along. And then we're going to move in and talk about some of our predictions for 2026. We're going to have a lot of guests on the podcast over the next several months and hopefully years. But, Andrew and I have a lot of experience as well, and we're hoping to give you a little taste of that from time to time. Just us, bringing some analysis on politics, business, life in Newfoundland and Labrador and Canada and the world. And one of the kind of pieces of response that I've gotten to this is that there really isn't much of that in this province. And so people are grateful for it, and I hope they continue to listen and like what we have to say today.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of doing this is it, do we find it enjoyable? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, this is the same stuff that we would do over a beer, as we said before, just a phone call. And the second part, obviously, is look, is there interest out there? And it seems to be that there is, just according to some of the nice emails we got, and even some of the messages that were not great. That's actually that's not a bad thing. I mean, look, there's nothing that's universal in terms of likability or whatever, but so far on that front, that's look, we enjoy it. Hopefully people enjoy it. And look, shout out to, your your publication, to online news, to traditional formats, shout out to Patty and Open Line. But this was something that wasn't happening, and that's one of the comments that I did get. So, look, there's gonna be times when me and you talk, and we've got some really friggin' good guests lined up for 2026, but I think it's a good way to sort of kick off the year to talk about, what we've like you say, what we've learned here. One of the things I will put out to people, because, podcasts are something that, they've exploded over years. I did not realize how amazingly behind the scenes technical it is. I mean, I'm as someone who has only sort of appeared on one side of the camera, I've never appreciated the skill that goes into presenting that to the public. Usually I just had to show up and mouth off into a microphone, and now getting exposure to this, it's been a massive amount of work. And shout out to the production.
Yeah, and shout out to producer Chris for helping us get there, because we wouldn't be here without him. The technical side was a huge learning curve for me as well, still is. And the listener and the viewer might notice imperfections, and they might notice as we continue along, even from today's episode compared to the first one, little improvements. And we're kind of bootstrapping it here, and that's how it's going to work for a while, but it'll continue to get better on that side. And it's one of the things that attracted me to it in the first place, learning how to do a little bit of what I do as a journalist in a new medium. And the technical side is the biggest part of that, but there's other ones as well. Just getting used to being in broadcast. And apologies to Leela Evans, who I never mispronounce when I write her name, but I mispronounced in our first episode. So, and my apologies there. I'll get it right in the future. And also, I'm used to interviewing people. I've been doing it for more than a decade. Andrew, you're used to being interviewed. And we kind of get used a little bit more to like the back and forth, throwing it back to the other. In the first episode, it was a little bit like you were kind of leading the way and throwing it to me, and I was forgetting to throw it back to you. And there's nuance of co-hosting as well, and that's one of the things I've learned and appreciated learning as we start this.
Yeah, it's funny because you learn so much. I mean, I go back to when I first got in politics in 2011. I mean, I had been interviewed before locally, but you learn how to get better at it. You learn what works for the hosts. And so I've tried to apply a little bit of that. I mean, you get some politicians, geez, they'll go on for 3 minutes, and it's like you're not giving them what they need. You get better at the sound bite, the little clip that you know that they want. So keeping that in mind, and now being that person that's asking the question. Now, thankfully, the guests we've had so far have been in the media far longer than you or I. So I mean, they were pros. But it's one of those things where it's a science, but there's definitely an art to it.
Yeah, 100%. And one that I look forward to honing some more. Another thing that I've learned, and this will lead into a little bit of promotion for both of us, is just that the warmth of the reception was really quite surprising. One of the most common things that people said to me was, this was missing. And there are a few podcasts in Newfoundland and Labrador, not many. And some of them are like niche. There's the guys who have a rock climbing business and they'll talk about coffee. The Hulk Caesar show is probably the most professionally done, and it's entertainment based, and it is a good podcast. But there's nothing in the politics realm. The CBC has the Signal, and it has a podcast now, and it's quite good. But it's very little, and we want to continue doing it. And to do that long term, we really need more support. And it's very easy. You subscribe, you do it on every medium you can, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, because if we have that and that continues to grow, then we can continue to do this.
Yeah, I mean that's part of this too is that it does involve promotion and it does involve having to make sure that people do these things, like you said, the like and subscribe. I mean, I'm still laughing at the fact that I'm actually saying that as someone who's got kids in the YouTube world, and I mean, if I had a friggin' dollar for every time I've heard one of their videos say like and subscribe, uh, but it's the reality of what we need to do. The other thing too, and we've been very lucky. Look, we've been getting feedback on. I've been getting it on LinkedIn. I've been getting it by personal email on the Facebook page. Please check it out, the Facebook page. But the other thing too is like, look, we do have an email, the Honourable and the Hack at gmail.com, and hopefully Chris can punch it up on the video towards the end of the show. But if you want to reach out to us privately with thoughts, suggestions, criticism, I mean, we're there for it. I mean, one of the biggest things I heard, and I'm so conscious of it now, is that apparently I've been saying absolutely way too much. I've been trying to avoid the 100%. So now I have this phobia of saying absolutely. So I'm trying to think of some synonyms. Anyways, trying to figure it out. But you can tell that you get into your head on this. So, but look, we want to get better at this stuff. So lay it on us, man.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. I listened to a basketball podcast with Jalen Rose years ago, and he would say ad nauseum 3 times an episode, and it was like drilling a hole into my head after a while. And so we viewers will tell us that. We look forward to it, and thanks for bringing up the email because we do want all that feedback. Not only want that feedback, we can use some of that in future episodes. If you put in the subject line when you email us mailbag question, eventually we're going to have enough content from that we can kind of have a little two-way podcast, and we respond to what you have to ask to us, me as a journalist, Andrew as a former politician, and anything that we want to talk about and you want to ask us and talk about on the podcast. So yeah, keep the comments coming, keep the feedback coming. We look forward to it. We've got thick skin, or we say we do, and we look forward to it all. With that, Andrew, did you want to add anything more to that, or should we perhaps move on to
No,
our predictions
I
for a
think
big year in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, look, 2026 is upon us. The start of a new year is always, it's just fun to think about what lies ahead. And one of the things you and I discussed too, like we've literally just had a quarter century of this century is now done, moving into that second one. But yeah, there's a lot of things to think about, to ponder, to wonder, and to surmise. And look, who doesn't like making predictions that can come back and haunt us towards the end of the year? So, as someone that has had a lot of what they've said in Hansard in black and white to be used against you later on when what you said proved to be completely ridiculous. I'm all for us putting it out there now, some predictions on politics and beyond. So, but that being said, you're going first, brother. You got to lay it on us, man. What is the first prediction for you?
Yeah, so we're gonna do three each, and for me, I looked at two for Newfoundland and Labrador, and one more national and global. Like you, I'm not afraid of being wrong. In fact, there's a very good chance I'm going to be wrong about all three of mine. Uh, I'll start locally, and I'll start with politics. And my prediction for 2026 is that there will be a by-election, at least one, in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Oh, okay,
so
okay.
I won't. I'm going to pull a little bit of my punch here, and I'm not going to name a particular riding or a particular candidate. And that's because I can't let this job interfere too much with my day job, and that's as editor of All Newfoundland Labrador, and things that we are reporting on, have reported, or are pulling the thread to report in the future. I've got to keep that in that lane. But what I will say is that the by-election could come from somebody stepping down in any of the three parties. I think the NDP is the least likely of those, but their leader just ran an election. Maybe he looks to something different. I don't think it's impossible, but I think it could be a Liberal stepping down. I think it could be a PC stepping down. And it's not of my three predictions, perhaps this one's the safest. We often have a by-election in any odd year in Newfoundland and Labrador, but it's the first change in government in a decade. We've got some new MHAs who are learning the ropes, and maybe something happens there. And we've got some liberals who are getting used to life in opposition, and maybe something happens there. And there's a lot going on. I think the stakes for a new government are higher
So
than they normally have been. They often are high. It's politics in Newfoundland. It's often high. But yeah, I think something could happen unexpectedly for someone, or perhaps expectedly for the reasons I just said, and we'll have at least voters in one district, maybe more, going back to the polls.
okay, so just so people know, like, I mean, I actually did put a little bit of thought into this. I have it written down. So I'm going to go a little bit further than you. I actually didn't have that there would be a by election. What I wrote down here was that the provincial Liberals will lose a seat. Now, no inside intel on that. I'm just guessing that when you have a change in government like we had in 2025, when people go into opposition, sometimes that becomes the reassessment of future aspirations, future goals, careers. So I'm just putting it out there that I don't think you're going to see. Obviously, look, the independents. Paul's now the speaker, which actually will bleed into my second one. Eddie's not going anywhere. I don't think the NDP are going anywhere. I think Jim and Sheila are going to be, I just don't see that happening. And I guess my guess is that I think the opposition has a greater likelihood of losing a spot than the governing party. But again, could be proven to be wrong there. But that was my prediction. It's hard to tell. I mean, a lot of times you see it coming. In this case, I have nothing that leads me to think that. Just looking at, I guess, politics over the last number of decades.
Yeah, I think historically you're probably correct in that after changing government, if there is somebody to step down or go to an independent or cross the floor, it's typically from the new opposition party than it is the governing party. So that seems totally valid to me. I think it could come from any of the three. And for the listener and the viewer, we didn't discuss our predictions with each other until like 30 minutes beforehand. So it's not surprising there's a little bit of overlap here on our first one. And it's fun overlap because, a little bit of turmoil and conflict and by-elections is always fun for the political junkies in us. And so that should keep everybody interested heading into the year. Do you want to start with your second, since your first was kind of
Yeah.
intertwined with mine?
Yeah. So, sort of on the same topic, and this, look, it's a bit of nuance to it, depending on how you look at it. And maybe I'm looking at it from an inside baseball point of view, but I'm predicting that when the House of Assembly does reopen in the spring, there's going to be at least one massive, oversized blow up, racket, as they say, something during this first session. And there's a bunch of reasons why I say that. Number one, you've got a new speaker. And, Paul has probably the second most experience in the house after Eddie. I think he's going to do a good job, but there's a massive learning curve to being a speaker. All of a sudden you go from a participant in the fray to essentially being the referee. So that's one part of it. The second part is you've got a new government. So some of these men and women have been sitting in the opposition benches, chomping at the bit, and now they're going to be on the other side. And on the flip of that, you're going to have a situation where the former government are now in opposition, and you got a lot of new people that are learning how the House of Assembly works. Now, I'm not talking about like a political issue racket. Like every day there's a news where, opposition says something about healthcare or whatever. I'm talking about some kind of issue that turns into a bigger than normal argument because of some of the newness of the members that we have, some of the, some of the, I guess, disagreements from the past. You've got some of these things that simmer over time. I know I've seen that myself. And so, again, I think, and the fact too that the house didn't sit in the spring, means that it sort of gets pent up. And I look, having experienced that myself, like when I first got elected in 2011, government of the day didn't open the legislature till the spring, and it just gave you that pent up energy. You couldn't wait to get in there. And sometimes you overshoot and you go you go a little too far. We were new, we were young, we're you know trying to go at things, and so I think we might see a little bit more of that this year.
Yeah, that's a great point about pent up energy and being in the house. And I'll take the listener and the viewer a little bit behind the scenes here, because as somebody who's been in the press gallery, you get, when you're in the gallery looking down onto the House floor, a very different perspective than you do if you're watching the evening news, or even if you're watching the live feed, which I can't imagine a lot of people do, because there is more catcalling. You notice a lot of facial expressions, hand gestures. The aggression in the House is amplified when you're in there watching it live. And I've seen a few moments that I'm not going to repeat any of them in particular here because I didn't plan going into it. But there are also some of the liberals who are now moved into opposition. Some of the feistier ones are still there, right? Like Lisa Dempster is there. The leader, John Hogan is a kind of fiery lawyer. I've asked him now in a few media scrums, well, do you think X is a bad idea that the PCs have brought forward? He's like, oh yeah, it's a terrible idea. Well, what if they change their minds on it because they're kind of looking at, say, the future fund differently, or maybe they'll look at this issue of the ferries differently. Well, no, they got to keep their promises. So it's going to be coming at them hard.
That's part of
one
it
way
too.
or the other.
That's part of it too, is that when you get a new government in, one of the things that they're going to do is talk about all the mistakes that the previous government made. I mean, that's not a Newfoundland and Labrador thing. That's governments everywhere. When you get in power, that's what you do. And of course, the crowd on the other side, anybody that's been remaining, not new, will say, are going to want to defend those decisions. But you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of times people do see what's on the news. They see, or they might see the live feed. I don't think there's many watching it, but it is not even close to indicative of what actually goes on. Now, little news flash for everybody, because every once in a while there's the evergreen story about, decorum in the house. I can tell you is a hell of a lot tamer than what it used to be. And even when I started, I'm sure it was a hell of a lot tamer. I mean, you're not seeing a whole lot of like going back in the days where, Joe Smallwood's son goes over and punches a guy in the face for insulting his mom. I mean, that kind of stuff, pre TV. But it has changed. It has gotten different. It is not as loud as it used to be. It is not as nasty. That's just my observation, my opinion from my almost 15 years in there. But when you're there in person, you see, like you say, you see the gestures, you see the comments that are not picked up on the speaker or not picked up in the Hansard. What you'll see there when it's typed up, it says order, order, whenever some member state. But I think it's going to lead to, look, you want a bit of, it's meant to be emotional. is meant to be you're talking about important issues on both sides. And so I think it's a natural thing. I don't think anybody wants to see a house where there's not um, some liveliness to it.
Yeah, it's a really good point about nastiness. And I'll follow up on it with an anecdote before moving on to my next prediction, because in, I believe, 2022, we did a story at All Newfoundland and Labrador about then Premier Andrew Parsons and a fishing trip he took in
Hannah said,
Labrador.
Hannah said, I got to jump in. Then Premier Andrew Parsons.
um, Okay, I think we're going to keep that one in here, but we have a ton for the blooper reel down the road. In 2022, then Premier Andrew Fury, another Andrew, took a trip to an expensive fishing lodge owned by John Risley. Risley was there. It came at the time that World Energy GH2 was considering or initially pitching its hydrogen plans. And so, and it eventually led to, I believe, a review by the Commissioner of Legislative Standards. It was an interesting story, and it came up in the House. And of course, the catcalling happened, and somebody in the Liberal side, I don't remember who, kind of took a veiled personal shot at an individual conservative MHA and regarded an issue, kind of a family issue that they were having. And there was a threat to bring it up sometime. And that's, that's tough stuff. That's politics in the House. But afterwards, there was an apology. I think there was a handshake. It simmered down pretty quickly. And perhaps that wouldn't have happened 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And I'll let you respond to that, and then I'll move on to my next prediction and hopefully my last blooper.
It's funny. I remember the issue itself when, there was a lot of going on about the premier and the trip and whatnot. I don't have a great recollection of that, argument. I mean, that's the type of stuff. I mean, I had situations where I remember one cabinet minister, this was going back in the day, threatened to wring another one's neck. And then, it led to the apologies and whatever else. I mean, I guess not it's not right, but it has happened. We've seen lots of that stuff, but I guess what I would say is that I think with the coming in of a new session in the House and everything else, I think you're going to see it probably start off super feisty, and who knows what it leads to.
Yeah. So I'll jump into my next prediction for 2026. And this one is that I am predicting there will be a benefits agreement for Beta Nord, the oil and gas mega project pitched for offshore. For anybody who doesn't know, it's upwards of 1 billion barrels in several sort of stages. It would be the most remote offshore oil project in planet Earth's history. And there's a lot at stake economically and politically. The two sides, the provincial government and Equinor, who is the lead partner, have appeared very far apart on a benefits agreement. How employment and construction will be set out as it benefits the people of the province. I think they will bridge that gap and come to a deal. And the sort of primary reason for this prediction is that I don't think we're going to see a deal on Churchill Falls, whether that's because it's outvoted in a referendum or simply because the Parti Québécois come to win in Quebec and, the prospect for a deal falls apart. I think the odds of that one are becoming longer and longer. And politically, I'm not sure how tenable it is for both of these mega projects to be taken off the table for a new government that has a relatively slim majority.
So this is where, I mean, I have to tread carefully. Obviously, I'm not that far removed from being the minister responsible for industry, energy, and technology, and so it's probably better if I don't weigh in. But what I would say is this, and I think the reason I can say it is that I've made public comments to that. I mean, both of the projects that you mentioned are massive projects for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I think what I've said actually as well is that, everybody wants to see things move forward. And it's in the best interest of the province. So even when I was the minister there, there's a reason you have the meetings and do the work is because you want to see it go forward. It's a massive, massive opportunity. But at the same time, having been in that chair, I recognize, these files are inherently difficult and have all kinds of moving parts that you have to weigh as when you're a part of a government. So that goes back to something we might have actually said before, is that this government, PC government, when they got in October, I don't know of a government that came in with such huge files. Like, I'm not talking about the budget. Everybody comes in with a budget situation or a difficult fiscal situation, but they came in with massive files that are time sensitive, and the transition's hard enough as it is, and they've had that there. So look, I think the Christmas break probably hit them at the right time because it's been nothing but a sprint for them since they've gotten in. And now as we move into 2060s, files are time sensitive. And perhaps the best thing for me to say is I wish them the best in moving files forward. I having been there, that's not a partisan thing. That's a Newfoundlander and Labradorian thing. I mean, I want a province where my kids want to stick around, and so I wish the best for decision makers.
Yeah. So before Andrew says anything else, I could get him in trouble. I'll finish this one off and then throw it back to him. But the political challenge, I think, to getting a deal done, and when I say a benefits deal, that does not necessarily mean the project goes forward. There's a lot of other economics at play here. The price of oil, it's been falling. Equinor has projects in Brazil. They have offshore wind problems with offshore wind. So there's other things that will determine if this goes ahead. But the benefits agreement is one of the next major milestones. And a challenge to that is that Tony Wakeham, the progressive conservative leader and premier, secured a very big endorsement from Trades NL, who have been very aggressive in their stance of a very large amount of topsides, which is the top part, the parts that's above the water, for the project being done in the province. Equinor wants almost none of that done in the province, so that's hard to bridge. But I do think the PCS has some room to make other concessions. I think they have some room to disappoint or perhaps find some compromise with Trades NL. There's room that they have to navigate on that side of things that they don't on Churchill Falls. And I think that we may see a bit of an ordeal because there's just more room to get something done there. And, we hope that project goes ahead for sure. Andrew, let's talk about something you're allowed to talk about. So what's your next prediction?
So I think, and this is probably not much of a stretch, it's on the federal side of things. People may not have noticed, but just prior to Christmas, I think it might have been the 18th or 19th, there was a massive deputy minister shuffle in federal politics. And people don't realize, like, these civil servants have a massive amount of importance, sway. There's some of them have different histories. In this case, there were new ones brought in, but I think it's going to lead to, you're going to see a federal cabinet shuffle sooner rather than later on the federal scene. A lot of interesting dynamics here where you have, Trudeau era cabinet ministers and non-cabinet ministers that still are there, maybe looking to see what's next. You have new people that came in under in the Carney election, and others that were sort of there in between. But from everything that I've read and heard about Prime Minister Carney, is that he comes from that business background or that banking, the economics background, and more of a we need to get things done ASAP. And so I think there's a ton of pressure on ministers to move files, to get files done. And I think you're going to see the repercussions of some of these changes soon with some new faces in and out.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and a great point about that CEO style, which I think you often see not just with people from a business background, but from people who enter politics in the top job. You get your types who work their way up, your Pierre Poilievres, who come up from a backbench MP and move up and up and up, and then you get your Mark Carneys or your Andrew Furies who come in straight at the top. Danny Williams, same thing. He was in opposition for a very short stretch. And in my experience as a journalist, that type tends to have a different set of expectations. Sometimes it's just naivete about how slow the political wheels can turn. And sometimes it is just they're wired to things getting done faster. And, what we hear about Prime Minister Carney is he runs a pretty tight ship. You are not going to be late for a cabinet meeting, and you better be ready to deliver or have a good reason why not. And that's going to create friction. And I think that's a really fair prediction because all of those things, those elements usually add up to a cabinet shuffle somewhere down the line.
Yeah, and you just look at federally too, and it's such a difference with the provincial scene. We'll say, like, in a legislature with 40 members, it's hard for any premier to make substantive change. We'll say, because you just don't have the numbers, you don't have the people in cabinet or out. that you have on the federal scene. I mean, when you've got a caucus the size of Mark Carney's and you've got a cabinet that size, there are a hell of a lot of people that are sitting there waiting for the chance to get in there, and it provides for an incentivization. It's harder to do that in a smaller legislature. When you just look at the different people that you have, the numbers that you have. So I think it's coming. The deputy minister one was an interesting one. There was a lot of chatter in Ottawa about that just before Christmas too. So it's not as much, but I think you're going to see that. That's my take. It might be a crappy prediction, but I think it's coming soon.
No, I like it. I wouldn't bet against it. My last one, I probably would bet against. A lot of people are betting against it, and I made it last year and was wrong. But I'm going to go predict that. Unfortunately, the economic clouds are going to darken, and we might be looking at a recession countrywide, if not globally, in 2026. I had said this privately to people last year, and I was looking real smart around Liberation Day. And then we saw interest rates start to fall. We saw investment in AI just really turbocharge the market. And stock market performance last year was out of this world. TSX record year, a European stocks record year. That isn't quite mirrored by kind of broader economic activity, but employment in the U.S. and Canada is still strong. Other economic indicators are good, but there are big shaky signs. And I think some of the things that I thought were going to cause trouble last year weren't wrong so much as they were early. I think a lot of companies found ways to delay the impacts of tariffs on their operations. A lot of countries negotiated bilateral deals, often to their detriment. I mean, Donald Trump was kind of bet correctly that the U.S. had the political weight to bully people, and with the exception of China, every country caved to some degree, including Canada, despite all the elbows up rhetoric. There wasn't really a lot of cooperation between countries about, hey, why don't we stand together against the U.S. on this? So the U.S. got their way on reshoring in a lot of cases. But ultimately, all of that just adds inefficiency, and consumers feel it. There's a higher risk of inflation and now there's political pressure with the next Fed chair in the U.S. to lower rates, perhaps more than they should be, to keep a damper on inflation. And you've got a president and administration in the U.S. that they will go into as much debt as possible to avoid recession, but that could increase inflation and cause trouble elsewhere. I just think the clouds, to say nothing of all the capital in AI that hasn't really generated the returns yet. All of these risks are there. People talk about a bubble. If you're too early on the bubble, it's worse than being too late. So maybe I am too early here, but just all of these risks swirling together. And I think that this could be the year where it comes home to roost and unfortunately has a real negative economic impact.
This is where I wanted to insert my dated Debbie Downer references. But the reality is I'm not inclined to bet against you on that, because I'm not known for my substantive finance experience. There's probably a reason I was never a minister of finance. But the things you mentioned, the reality is that they seem likely, and I know there's nothing that is certain. The big thing for me is I still think a lot of volatility that is down south, that has massive implications throughout the world, and we are sometimes unable to counteract that or counterattack that. I mean, we sort of got to sit there and wait and see how it goes. We're not throwing that weight around. We're an uneven partner in that equation sometimes. Again, I hope you're still early. We want to see the strong economic indicators. We want to see job numbers continue to go up. I think provincially, I think that you're going to see a positive year. But again, a lot of times when we're talking about commodities, when we're talking, a lot of what we sort of deal with is not because of the decisions we make, it's sort of dealing with the effects of decisions made elsewhere.
Yeah, and it's interesting that note about the provincial economy, because I actually think other than our massive and growing deficit and the constant fiscal cliff we're staring down, that some of those indicators are a little stronger. I think we're going to see good home construction, house prices have been rising faster here than in other parts of the country. You haven't seen that downturn in home construction like you have in Ontario. The commodity sector could take a tumble. We're already, in fact, starting to see that a little bit in mining. But assuming that some of these big projects go ahead, at least one of Beta Nord or Churchill Falls, yeah, I think Newfoundland is in fact perhaps on a slightly sounder footing than the broader global economy. But this is one that I'm sure people will be quick to point out that I was wrong about if we do this next year. Is there anything else you wanted to end with in the
I'm
predictions?
coming in with one, and you know what? I'm going off the book here in the sense that it's not politics, it's not business, but you heard it here first. The Jays are going back to the World Series. That's my prediction. I am totally on the bandwagon. I think the signings that they're making, I still think they got at least another one or two big signings. I'm thinking they're back in the World Series this year. Not sure who they're going to play against. It's always hard to bet against the Dodgers, but let's see what happens there. But that's my prediction, man.
Well, I look forward to it because anytime a Canadian team goes that far, then my wife starts actually getting a little interested, and I get really peculiar commentary about how does Vladimir Guerrero actually run fast and things like that make baseball just a little bit more fun. I will make another sort of informal one and predict that I have at least 10 more book sales next year. And I'm using that for a segue to some shameless self promotion. We had Tim Powers on recently, and he was pushing me to promote my book a little more because I hadn't done that on the podcast yet. So, for about 30 seconds, I'm going to mention that I
Go
recently
for it, man. Go for it.
published a book and I get to learn how to hold it in front of the camera properly. Dangerously Close to Contempt. It is a biography of Roger Bill, who happens to be my father, a Vietnam War draft dodger who settled in Canada and eventually Newfoundland, became a journalist. So, I come by it honestly or perhaps unfairly, and was just a constant agitator and remains so. He was working for CBC on Sunday morning and wound up in places like Tiananmen Square and the Gulf War, Yugoslav wars. And he also ran programs that regularly wound up in court in Newfoundland because they would rub people the wrong way. Went on to found a alternative newspaper called Current that just constantly poked people in business and politics in the eye. And even before that, before he got into news, was involved as an activist in some of the development issues in St. John's, losing battles against developments like Atlantic Place, which happens to be where I work today, and winning some like Plan 91, which is a plan to put a highway all the way through downtown, connecting from the Harbor Arterial to Kingsbridge Road, like so many cities in this country that have a highway cutting through their downtown. And they won that one. So that's all in a book. You can buy it in Kohl's, Chapters, Down Home, some Piper stores. And I encourage everybody to do it. And this is the last time I'll do this on our podcast for at least a month or two. Yeah, thanks for putting up with it.
No, you should be proud of it. I can honestly say that I have read it. I actually read it prior to the podcast being launched. And it's a great read. And this come from someone who, was not a major news consumer back in Roger Bill's, producing days and reporting days. So a lot of this was news to me, like when I'm reading about his part in that. And the stuff about not being from St. John's, I did not know about I had heard about it, but like the massive racket about Atlantic Place and the Plan 91. I mean, that was all news to me and really interesting. As a history buff, I really enjoyed all of it. And it was it's a good read when you have a hard time putting it down. And I had a hard time putting it down, so you should be proud of it, and people should buy it. I mean, it's there to support Newfoundland and Labrador journalism and writing, and so yeah, by all means. And again, I'm saying all this without the fact that I get nothing out of this. I get zero out of this. I just like the book.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'd appreciate the note on history because while it is a biography, it is sort of a collection of pieces of history just as much. My publisher, in fact, made the reference to Forrest Gump, which she was worried about when she told me, but I thought it was great because it is a story about a man, but it's really a story about these various discrete pieces of history that he is tied to, from Tiananmen Square, which is a massive global event, to some of these really distinct but important local pieces of history, like the LSPU Hall in St. John's turning into a theater, for which Roger was a key player. Those sorts of stories are just as interesting as his story, and I hope people look forward to reading it for that reason. So
Absolutely.
we've reached the point where people are tuning out.
Well, it's a
Andrew,
good
what do you think of
segue.
some of them?
It's a good segue because look, we want people to take an opportunity to buy the book and to read the book, and it's a good way for us to sign off here. We want people to tune in to what we're doing here. We want people to like, subscribe, listen, watch, whatever your medium is, and get in touch with us. So we've got more coming. We got some excellent guests lined up for the first part of 2026. Our plan is to be dropping these every Tuesday. New episodes, new material coming every Tuesday. So hopefully you're enjoying it. If you are, let us know. If you aren't, let us know. And but yeah, we're enjoying this so far, and it's a great chance to talk about it.
Yeah, looking forward to that feedback. Looking forward to doing more of these with you, Andrew, and our many interesting guests to come. Really, it hurts not to name some of them now, but we want to nail down the schedules because I think people would be really interested, and I'm looking forward to a few of them in particular.
Uh,
Yeah, I can't wait. 2026 is going to be a great year. And with that, we'll say thank you to our listeners, to producer Chris, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.